Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Biology Daily Booster. This is number 4 in our Paper 2 series, and it is Advanced Information Listed Topic for both the Foundation Biology and Higher Tier Biology. What we're going to do then is we're going to have a look at the genetics topic first bit. So this is Module 5. To start off with then, we need to know a couple of key terms here. The word variation just refers to differences within a species, and the phenotype are the observable characteristics. So what we mean by that are the things you can see. So someone with blue eyes, that would be the phenotype. If they have brown hair, phenotype. When it comes to what actually causes these variations, then we can split into two categories. We have genetic variation, which is caused by the genes you inherit from your parents. So that would be eye colour, blood group. And then environmental variation is caused by the environment in which you live. So this would be things like the accent you've got, if you've got any scars, tattoos, piercings, all of those sort of things. It is worth remembering that there are some characteristics that are caused by both environmental and genetic variation. So I've given you a couple of examples there, intelligence and height. If we look at height in a bit more detail, obviously if your entire family line is of people who don't go above 5'5", then the chance of you being suddenly 6 foot odd is immensely slim, I'm not going to lie. So of course there is a genetic factor there. But even if you come from a family of like 6 foot odd giants, if you don't get a decent diet when you are growing up with the right amount of protein, etc., you're never going to be able to reach that true potential of your height. So something like your diet is going to affect just how tall you get at the end of the day. So it's that combination of both genes and your environment. When we consider variation then, what we find is we can split it into two categories. We will either have continuous variation or discontinuous variation. If we talk continuous variation, this is something that can take any value within a range. So a great example here is things like height or the length of fur. Because it's not just one thing or another, your height could be anything within a big range. So you could be 182 centimeters, 182.1 centimeters, etc. So we have a whole range of values that it could be. Continuous variation is caused by genetic and environmental causes. And what we normally find is controlled by multiple genes, not just a single gene, but multiple genes interacting. If we're asked how to display continuous variation on a graph, the correct answer is a histogram. Hopefully from maths we know that a histogram is like a bar chart, but it's not a bar chart because all of the bars are touching. Do not leave gaps if you are asked to plot a histogram. They've all got to touch, otherwise you've drawn a bar chart. If you are asked to draw a histogram, of course, make sure that you do have appropriate scale, first of all. You've labelled both axes with a title and any units that are relevant. And of course, the bars are drawn nice and clearly, neatly with a ruler and pencil, and that they are all touching each other. Discontinuous variation, this one is something that would only be discrete values. By that I mean it could either be this or it is that. So there are very clear categories. You can't be anything on a range here. Good example is something like a blood group. So if we think about blood group, then your options for blood group in simple terms, you are either A, B, AB, or O. There's no scale here. You are literally one of those 4 blood groups. That's it. So everyone will fit into one of those 4 categories. Because they're discrete, we don't use a histogram, we use a bar chart. With a bar chart, we must have gaps between the bars. They must not touch. be careful when you do these. If they do give you this as one of their maths-based questions, bar charts, bars don't touch, histogram, bars do touch. As always, when drawing your bar chart, again, make sure you pick a suitable scale, make sure that you do label your axes with a heading and units, and your bars are drawn nicely with a ruler and a pencil. So, what we're going to look at then is a little bit of reproduction. We're going to focus on asexual reproduction. So asexual just means without sex. What we're going to produce then are these clones, which are organisms that are genetically identical to the parent. So this is a phrase we should get used to using, genetically identical. Good example of a species that uses asexual reproduction are bacteria. So bacteria reproduce asexually through a process of mitosis. We've looked at mitosis previously in paper 1. What happens? The DNA replicates. Once it's replicated, the chromosomes line up along the equator. They're pulled to the opposite poles of the cell, and then the cell divides to make two genetically identical daughter cells. That is literally what bacteria do. It's not just bacteria though. We have some plants that also utilize asexual reproduction. Some of these you'll be familiar with. Spider plants, probably in a science lab somewhere in your school. So those ones have these little runners that come off with little plantlets at the end. Those plantlets are clones. They're genetically identical to the parent. Potato plants have tubers. Daffodils have bulbs. All asexual reproduction. Even some animals can use asexual reproduction. And I've given you two examples there, starfish and sea anemones. For us as humans though, we cannot reproduce asexually. We require sexual reproduction in order to reproduce, as do most animals. Now the key things about our sexual reproduction then, it requires two parents first of all, and because we've got DNA coming from both of those parents, we get genetic variation because the actual genes that we're going to be expressing are dependent upon what DNA we've inherited, so which two parents we actually have. What we start off with then are gametes. Now a gamete is just the fancy scientific way of saying sex cell. And by sex cells we mean the sperm and the egg in humans. So sperm and egg are both sex cells, which are gametes. When we think about the egg cells, these are made in the ovaries, sperm cells made in the testes. And both of them are made through the process of meiosis. This is one of those points where spelling actually is important. Because meiosis and mitosis get mixed up a lot in biology, we're a bit pickier when it comes to the marking of the actual spelling. Not that you have to have it perfect, but if there is a T anywhere in meiosis, it's going to be marked wrong, because then you've basically sort of written mitosis. So no T's in meiosis. The rest of the spelling, if you kind of sounded it out and it's just a little bit wrong, but there's no T's in there, you should still get the mark. Key thing about our gametes is that they are haploid. This means they have only half the number of chromosomes of a normal body cell. Now they can ask this question, it's quite a nice question that comes up. They will pick a random creature that we've never heard of and say, in a normal body cell, a polar bear has 36 chromosomes present. How many chromosomes are present in the gamete? Well, if it's got 36 in a body cell, we need to halve that in order to get it in the gamete. So 36 divided by 2 is going to give us 18. If they were to give us the number of chromosomes in a gamete, all you've got to do to get it in a normal body cell is double it. Worth remembering, plants also use sexual reproduction, so the pollen is the male gamete and the egg cell is the female gamete. Once they've actually joined together with those two nuclei fusing, then the seed is going to grow into the new plant. They can ask you to compare sexual and asexual reproduction. So what we've got in this little table then, you can see some of the boxes are green backed and others are pinky backed. because we've got advantages and disadvantages. If we consider advantages of asexual reproduction first of all, then if the parent is well adapted to the environment, the offspring will be too, because they are genetically identical. So that means if the parents are suited to the environment, the offspring will be guaranteed to be well suited as well. Second advantage, only one parent is needed, so we can carry out reproduction much faster. Downside, however, because they are all genetically identical, a change in one of those biotic or abiotic factors could lead to the whole lot of them being wiped out, because they'd all be susceptible to the same thing. Advantage of sexual reproduction, we have variation. Variation leads to adaptations. Also means they're more likely to survive a change in one of those factors. Downside, however, two parents are needed, so reproduction is going to be slower, because you've obviously got to find a suitable mate and go through the mating process. So that means sexual reproduction is always going to be slower than asexual reproduction. It is worth noting that there are some organisms that actually just use both sexual and asexual reproduction depending on the availability of mates, the conditions, etc. And the best example there are the good old sea anemones. As always, if there are some bits you want to look at in a bit more detail, use the videos on the main channel, use your revision guides, go over your own classwork notes from that point in your actual learning, and of course have a look at some of the past exam papers to just get a feel for the kind of questions that come up here. Don't forget, of course, to join us again tomorrow for our next Biology Daily Booster.